Thank you, Dr. Locklair. Can everybody hear me? Okay, sound good? Yes? All right, wonderful. Well, I wanted to start off by thanking you all for being here today. I don't know about you, but one of my favorite things about conferences like this is coming and seeing other people, right? Because for one weekend, you feel like, I'm not alone. There are other people who understand it. There are other people who get it. And I know that there are a million other things that you could be doing on this beautiful last weekend of June. So thank you for coming out today. And Dr. Heck, I would respectfully disagree. I think this is the best time because if you guys need to take a nap, now's your time to do it. You've just had lunch, then you'll be wide awake and ready to go when we get into Dr. Heck's presentation later on. So I mentioned thank you for being here. I have been very inspired by the other presenters that I've heard this weekend. And I wish I could call out every single one of them and say something wonderful about them because they all deserve it. But there's one in particular that I would like to highlight because while I was getting ready for this presentation, I was very up and down about it. Who here has seen the movie Tangled? Okay, the animated film with Rapunzel? When she leaves the tower and she's like, this is great, and then suddenly this is awful, and this is, that was me getting ready for this presentation because I did not feel qualified. I am not a physical scientist. I am not an educator. And I know she doesn't know this, but before this presentation even came about, before this conference came about, I had the privilege of reading Stacy Lung's paper that she presented yesterday. And the title was, What Do the Experts Say? And Stacy, I just wanted to say thank you for that because it came at the exact right moment that I needed it because I'm not an expert and you inspired me to get out here and say this. So thank you. Thank you for that. With that aside, I'd like to start out just by giving you an outline of where I'm going to be going today. All right? So first of all, we're going to define some terms. I think we've done this at the start of every presentation, and as Dr. Voss said excellently yesterday, who is a real philosopher, all right, not a wannabe like me, we're going to start out by defining some terms. And this will most likely be review, but I want to make sure that we are all on the same page. When I say a word, you're thinking of what I'm thinking of. All right, so we're going to start off there. Then we're going to move on to views of what this compromise is. Throughout these past presentations that we've heard, we have heard excellent resources from views of the compromise, primarily from a biblical creationary scientist perspective. I'd like to give you a little bit of a different perspective now. I'm going to show you two different evolutionary thinkers and their view on what could actually be considered a compromise in this area. We'll have some help doing that. And then at the end, I'd like to give you some practical ideas for how we can put what we've learned this weekend into action. All right, we've had the content presentation so far. We've had all of this wonderful evidences that we can use. So what I would like to do is instead of presenting you with new content, I'd like to present you with a framework for maybe how you can start to see how these interrelate, how you can start to use these in your everyday life. I have been told that I need to start out my presentations with a joke. I am not a joke teller, I am an apologist, so I'm sorry about that. Thank you, we have some laughter there. I don't have a joke for you, so I have a cartoon. This is from one of my favorite comic strips, Peanuts. Charlie Brown says to Snoopy, I hear you're writing a book on theology. Oh, I hope you have a good title. And Snoopy thinks, I have the perfect title. Has it ever occurred to you that you might be wrong? And we laugh about that, right? Because it's funny, it's a cartoon. But I think there's an element of truth there. This is what I want to challenge you at the beginning of this presentation, and we will revisit it later on. All right? What evidence would it take to convince you that the creation model is false? What evidence would it take to convince you that the creation model is false? Think about that as we go through some of these other aspects of the presentation that we will be doing, and we will revisit this at the end. So let's start off with the term definitions now. I don't think I really need to do this. I think we're all on the same page of what theistic evolution is at this point, right? But just again, to be clear, this is just the idea that God used evolution for all origin events. We've already discussed, if you want to find a simple definition of either creation or evolution, have fun with that, and please send me one when you find it, because I could not find a concise one that everybody agreed on. But we are talking about natural processes and somehow smooshing God into there. So that's theistic evolution. Compromise. What exactly is a compromise? This was a little bit easier for me to find a definition of, but also a little bit difficult at the same time. So I'm going to use the definition that's accepted by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. All right, and that says a compromise is a settlement of differences by arbitration or by consent reached by mutual concessions. Something intermediate between or blending qualities of two different things, and a concession to something derogatory. All right, so compromise, a settlement, a concession, and intermediate. What I'd like to highlight about the term concession is that this happens in a non-physical state. What do I mean by that? This happens in something called the realm of values. This is not referring to physical states. So let me give you an example of that. All right, so after this conference today, my best friend and I have decided we're going to go see a movie. We're going to go down the road here, go to the Mequon Cinema, and we only have time and money to see one movie. Right? Only one today. My vote is for Avengers Infinity War. Her vote is for Incredibles 2. All right? We cannot see both of them at the same time today. So what could we do? All right, well, I could say, well, hey, you're wrong, I'm right, we're going to go see Avengers. Right? If you want to spend time with me, that's what we're doing. I could say, well, fine, I'll go with you. We'll see Incredibles 2. We could go see another movie altogether. We could see no movie. A compromise in that instance would not be for me to say, well, I'm right and you're wrong, therefore the movie theater is not showing Incredibles 2 today. The movie theater is very obviously showing Incredibles 2. All right, it's right on their sign. You can walk into the theater and see that. Simply because it is my value, it is my opinion, it's something that's important to me, I don't get to say that's not actually how reality is. All right, let me give you one more example. Maybe some of you have seen this internet meme that's going around, right? It's just a funny picture with a caption on it. And there's a man sitting outside a college campus, and he has all sorts of outrageous things on his sign, right? So what if we saw a man sitting outside this campus today, and his sign said, Wisconsin is the 30th state in the United States. Change my mind. Okay. Well, what exactly is he trying to say? Wisconsin is the 30th state in what sense? Our first step would be to determine what is it that you are saying? Are we the 30th state in milk production, polar bear plunging, Summerfest attendance? What are we the 30th state in? If he is saying Wisconsin is the 30th state in the United States to enter the Union, that's a fact. I can't change my mind on that. I can't change his mind on what he is presenting there. So that's what we mean by compromise. Now, right, I dabble in philosophy, okay, in addition to apologetics. Apologies for that also. So we're not going to get too deep into the weeds here, but I do want to give you a couple more terms that are going to help us define what we are actually saying. The first one I want to go over is called the inclusive or. Okay, so undoubtedly somebody, if you're like me, you think in contradictions. All right, so in my previous example, you probably thought of 3 contradictions to everything that I just said. Well, yeah, but I could sneak my iPad into the theater and I could stream one illegally and watch the other one on the big screen. Okay, and I can just smush them together like that. In philosophy, we have something that's called the inclusive or. Okay, simply stated, this means that both options of something can be true at the same time. 2 examples here for you. Maybe you've heard about another viral internet phenomenon, okay, the Yanny versus Laurel debate. This is pretty recent, still pretty fresh in our minds. There's an audio clip going around that you listen to. It's a voice saying a single word. Some people hear the word Yanny and some people hear the word Laurel. And the internet blew up. All right, and everybody was, what? How could you possibly hear Laurel? He is obviously saying Yanny and back and forth and back and forth. All right, there's a scientific reason behind that. Okay, it has to do with how your ears recognize pitch, especially as we age. We're able to pick up certain sounds versus others. There's also psychology behind it. Some of us were primed to hear one word versus the other. All right, but this is an example of inclusive or. Whether you hear Yanny or Laurel, both of those could technically be true at the same time. Optical illusions are another example of this. We saw an optical illusion in a previous presentation. All right, if I told you, look at this and tell me what you see, and some of you said, well, I see a goblet, and some of you say two faces, you're both right. You're both right. We don't have to get into an argument over this. All right, and then most of us can come to see, oh, wait, I do see both of them, even if we only saw one at the same time. Right? Inclusive or means both options can be true. This is contrasted with something that they call the exclusive or. All right? Inclusive or, both options can be true at the same time. Exclusive or, it's the opposite. One or the other, but not both options can be true. Okay, so here's an example. Driving with my best friend again. She's navigating, I'm driving, I come up to a T intersection, and I ask her, which way do I turn? Right or left? And she says, yes. Okay, well, I can't go straight because I can't go through the barrier. So which direction do I need to turn? I cannot turn both right and left at the same time in the same way. This is an example of something that's called the exclusive or, right? Contrasted with inclusive or. All right. Here's another fun term to go home and impress all your friends with, the law of non-contradiction. Confusingly, this is sometimes also called the law of contradiction. So I don't know why they have two competing terms for the same thing, but if you hear the law of contradiction, law of non-contradiction, in most cases, it's referring to the same thing. Contradictory statements cannot both be true at the same time in the same sense. Right? This is very similar to what we just saw with the exclusive or statement. And typically at this point, there will be some people who think, well, okay, that's great, but that's logic. Right? And we don't deal with logic. Philosophers are weird. They sit around and they think about stuff too much and nothing ever gets done. And to some extent, that's true. To some extent, that's true. But what the law of non-contradiction shows us is that this is incredibly practical. You all practice the law of non-contradiction, if not today, within the past couple days. And I know for sure that you did it today as well. When you are crossing a street in a heavily populated area, you look both ways. Why? Because the law of non-contradiction states that the bus and I cannot coexist at the same place. I don't have to be logical, but if I step in front of the bus, I'm going to find out very quickly that there is a reality here, that these two things cannot coexist at the same time. If you want to get deep about it, also law of non-contradiction, I cannot exist and not exist at the same time. Right? I'm either here presenting to you or I am not. Those two things cannot both be true, even though you might wish they were. Final definition before we get into some of the meat of this presentation. My primary area of interest is in apologetics. So I would like to share with you the definition that my mentor, John Warwick Montgomery, uses, and that that he has let me adapt for my use as well. When I use the term apologetics, I am referring to the defense of the Christian faith. Okay, now be careful. Other religions have apologetics. Some worldviews have very incredibly complex apologetics. So sometimes we can fall into the trap. I know I myself have done it too. I just say apologetics and assume everybody knows what I mean. No. I am referring to the defense of the faith, specifically the Christian faith. Right? And we get this term from 1 Peter 3:15. Always be ready to give a defense, Greek apologia, for the hope that is within you. Not going to get too deep into it, but it's a legal term. It's a technical term that has to do with giving arguments in a court of law. providing statements in a court of law. Practically, how I like to define it is apologetics has three main parts, and I title these parts CPR, because it helps me remember what I'm talking about. The first part of it, and when I say first, I'm not necessarily talking ordinally, like step one we do this and then we do this. These three parts intermingle, but they're in this order for a reason. All right, so the first one we will talk about is clarification. Clarification is what I'm doing right now. I'm defining my terms for you. I'm telling you exactly what it is that I am talking about. And this is vital because communication really depends on clarification. In order for me to not just be spouting words at you, in order for me to be communicating with you, I need to make sure that I am as clear as possible on what exactly it is that we are discussing. And we'll come back to this. First part of apologetics, clarification. Second aspect is what I call positive evidences. And this was also referenced in a presentation earlier today. This is providing evidences, arguments. Okay, careful, when I say arguments, I mean statements leading to a conclusion, not shouting matches. All right, so evidences for why you believe the way you believe. Positive evidences for why you believe what you believe. These are the reasons behind it. The third part of apologetics, I think, is the one we think about the most often when we use the term, and that's refutation. Refutation gets a bad rap, I think, because oftentimes we misunderstand it as simply shouting, "You're wrong and you're also stupid." Okay, there's my refutation of your point. That's not what this means at all. Refutation is about pointing out in love the holes in someone else's argument. Pointing out in love the holes in someone else's argument. Okay, I'm a martial artist on the side. I really enjoy it a lot. One of my favorite things to do is free sparring. And when I tell people that, they get kind of freaked out and think it's the cage fighting that you see on TV where everybody ends up, 3 broken arms. That's not what it is at all. Free sparring and refutation are about pointing out to your opponent, hey, do you know you have an opening there? Do you know you're not guarding your head well enough? Did you know that if I do this, I can get in on you? That's the purpose of refutation, not to beat somebody into the ground, not to say, how stupid could you possibly be, but to say, hey, did you know that there's a hole in your argument? That's the purpose of refutation. All right. Now, here's another term, but we're segueing from the definition part of this presentation, and now we're going to get more into what I really want to talk to you about today. And this is one of my very geeky areas of interest, so apologies for that. This is something called Einstein's gulf. Now, in order to talk about Einstein's gulf, I'd like to read you a couple of definitions here. Nancy Pearcey, who is a well-known author, professor, also an apologist, has 2 books that she does not use this term, but she is describing this phenomenon. Right? This comes from her books, both Total Truth and Love Thy Body. She refers to something that's called a fact-value split. Okay, she identifies this as a cultural paradigm that really informs the majority of modern worldviews. The 2 domains are values, which are private, subjective, and relative, and facts, which are, quote, public, objective, and valid for everyone. Okay, this is an important point. This split in thinking, all right, if you ask me, I'm going to say it's not new. All right, it's just more pronounced because of how culture is going. This is really going to popularize where we get the view of multiple truths. Okay, because there's a split here between facts and values. Now, Pearcey will admit that she is working off of something that Francis Schaeffer, who is also an apologist, prolific writer, founder of Locklair, termed the 2-story model. Okay, and what he was talking about there is the split of truth into 2 categories. Theological and moral truth exist in a private, notice this word again, private subjective, and relativistic sphere, while scientific truth is in the public and objective form. This makes it valid for everyone. Okay? The majority of thinkers today, both secular and religious, appear to accept this dichotomy as both fact and ideal. Right? And by fact, I mean this is how the world is, and by ideal, I mean this is how the world should be. A lot of people think this is how both it is and it should be. This brings us to where Einstein's gulf begins to intersect with the topic of this conference today. We have this split between fact, public, and objective. We're going to put science in there too, because that's objective. That's valid for everyone. And religion, well, that's a value. That's private. So we're going to put it over in this other area. Two different domains that have two different ways of arriving at their own truths. So now truth is multiple. Truth is no longer one. There's public truth and there's private truth. This ties into some of the my thinking on Einstein's gulf. All right, now Einstein's gulf, that is about Albert Einstein. He did not use the term Einstein's gulf for this. As close as I can figure, the term Einstein's gulf originated by Dr. John Aller. He's a linguist, he's a writer, he's a creationary scientist as well. To my knowledge, he was the first one who did that in 2000. All right. Einstein said, quote, "We have the habit of combining certain concepts and conceptual relations, propositions, so definitely with certain sense experiences that we do not become conscious of the gulf, logically unbridgeable, which separates the world of sensory experiences, fact, public, science, from the world of concepts and propositions." So what Einstein and Aller are saying is that there is a gap here. We do have material things and we have non-material things. We see this in many aspects of life. Okay? Philosophers, we talk about the mind-body problem. Why do material things have non-material properties? If you are a strict materialist, if you believe that material is all that there is, you have a different way of dealing with this gulf. Right? You say that everything reduces finally to materialism. But Aller, when talking about Einstein's gulf, says hard objects are never observed spontaneously to transform themselves into abstract ideas. The meteor that collided with the Earth, leaving the crater out near Winslow, Arizona, cannot appear on CNN to tell of its journey or to announce how it got streaking across the sky. There is a gap there. The question is whether this is bridgeable or not. So now I'd like to take a look at, we've seen a couple different thinkers on this split, all right, is how the world appears to be. So what does this have to do with theistic evolution and Einstein's gulf and these two evolutionary thinkers? Now, neither of these thinkers will use the term Einstein's gulf. Nancy Pearcey didn't use that term, Francis Schaeffer didn't use that term, John Aller used that term. All right, and I am using it to encompass the other observations they are making about the world. So I'm going to read you quotes by them so you can see for yourself this split is evident in their writing. Now, the problem for theistic evolution is that we need a way to bridge this split, if this is going to work at all. If we have something that is public, science, okay, if we're going to assume for the moment that's evolution, and something that is conceptual and private and non-physical, if we're going to accept for the moment that that's religion, we need a way to have these two intersect if theistic evolution is going to be a tenable compromise. So we're going to take a look at two evolutionary scientists, both very different. The first one I would like to talk about is, go back here, Dr. Stephen Jay Gould. And his answer to this question of, is there a bridge across the fact-value split, what I term Einstein's gulf, is actually very interesting. Dr. Gould uses something that he terms non-overlapping magisteria. Okay, he abbreviates it NOMA, and I'm very glad he did because I don't want to say that term again in this presentation. So NOMA for Dr. Gould are domains of inquiry. Domains of inquiry. Specifically, he differentiates between the magisterium, just the area of inquiry, that domain of science, which he defines as a teaching authority dedicated to using the mental models and observational techniques validated by success and experience as particularly well-suited for describing and attempting to explain the factual construction of nature. So for Dr. Gould, the first NOMA, the first way that we can know truth, science, fact, this is how the world is, and this is public. And this he differentiates between questions of moral issues about the value and meaning of life, both in human form and more widely construed, which must proceed under a different magisterium, far older than science, at least as formalized inquiry, and dedicated to a quest for consensus, or at least a clarification of assumptions and criteria about ethical ought, rather than search for any factual is about the material construction of the natural world. What is he saying here? Religion, morals, my opinion on how the world ought to be are private. They are confined to another domain. Now, both of these domains can coexist as long as they don't try to touch each other, right? As long as they're not crossing that line in the back seat of reality. As long as you stay on your side, totally fine. That's all right. So for Gould, he would say, yeah, there's a gap, and that's a good thing. Notice that. Gould would say there is a gap, and that's a good thing. Okay, but is over here. And my opinion on whether that is good or not should be over here. So without realizing it, Dr. Gould seems to be confusing his domain of magisteria. But in his own words, this is what he says about these boundaries. I do not see how science and religion could be unified or even synthesized under any common scheme of explanation or analysis. But I also do not understand why the two enterprises should experience any conflict. Science tries to document the factual character of the natural world and to develop theories that coordinate and explain these facts. Religion, on the other hand, operates in the equally important but utterly different realm of human purposes, meanings, and values, subjects that the factual domain of science might illuminate but can never resolve. Similarly, while scientists must operate with ethical principles, scientists must, they do, or they ought to. Some specific to their practice, the validity of these principles can never be inferred from the factual discoveries of science. Okay, what he's saying is don't fraternize. Keep them separate. Keep them separate. That's a value. That's a value. But that is what, in his opinion, is the answer to this dichotomy of public, private, fact, value, what we are talking about as Einstein's gulf. Michael Dowd, the second evolutionary thinker I'd like to talk about today, takes a completely different approach to a seeming compromise. Michael Dowd is known, he terms himself as America's leading evolutionary evangelist. He is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. He wrote a book entitled Thank God for Evolution. Mr. Dowd writes incredibly beautifully, and I will be perfectly honest with you. You can tell by picking up his book and just reading the introduction he passionately believes in this. This isn't just something that he did in his, this book is huge, right? It's huge. You can tell he has poured time and energy and so much thought into this. He starts his book with at least 11 that I could count heartfelt promises to his reader about what you will get if you read this book and come to accept the theistic evolution model. I think this is an important point to highlight because often I can get into the realm of saying, well, all evolutionary scientists, they're just hard-nosed, right? They just want to beat you over the head with their facts and with their science. Mr. Dowd is trying to speak to your heart. He is trying to reach you with his view of what is true. And I will give him credit for that. So he begins his book with 11 heartfelt revelations. All right, to aid in facilitating this reconciliation, what he terms the marriage between science and religion, he suggests that public truth and private revelations, there's that split again. We can't get away from this. Public truth and private revelations have undergone a subtle change in modern society. This is Dowd and Thank God for Evolution. New truths, plural, there's an S there. New truths no longer spring fully formed from the traditional founts of knowledge. Rather, they are hatched and challenged in the public arena of science. Private revelation consists of claims about relation that arise primarily from personal experiences. Okay, what is Dowd saying? He's saying these personal beliefs, these enshrined sacred texts, which are really just personal beliefs that somebody wrote down, okay, that was fine when we didn't know any better, when we were children, when humanity was younger and less advanced. That was okay. It helped us get to where we are now, but now we know better, according to Dowd. Now here is where we can get to the language of God. According to Dowd, facts are God's native tongue. Well, that's great. That sounds like a pretty nice statement. By facts, his definition is macroevolution. Evolutionary religion's alternative to reliance on ancient scriptures is empirical data. Dowd pulls no punches, and he is one of the clearest writers I have heard on this subject. In a way, he says, the data are our scriptures, and to these we submit. We have moved beyond belief in evolution. This is why he prefers the term religious knowers. He's not against religion. His book is filled with religious imagery. His book is very spiritual. He's attempting to connect with something with you on a deeper level than cold, hard facts. Evolution is the catalyst, and in many ways the soul of what Dowd sees as a spiritual awakening. Now that we know better, this is what he suggests. The mindset that welcomes public revelation, right, which is this next step in our advancement as humans. The mindset that welcomes public revelation is marked not only by openness and curiosity, which are good things, but such a mindset is grounded in a trust so solid that nothing that might be revealed would shake its foundation. That nothing that might be revealed would shake its foundation. What is this trust? This is Dowd. Here is mine. I have faith in the God-given ability of myself and others, individually and especially collaboratively, to interpret any new discovery made in any of the sciences in life-giving ways that serve the whole. One of Dowd's recurring themes in his book is the phrase, God is still speaking. Right? But he's speaking the language of facts. He's speaking the language of evolution. One last quote from Dowd. You see, as Christians claim, ultimately we are saved by grace through faith. Of course, this doesn't mean that Jews and Buddhists and Muslims and Taoists and Confucians are wrong. Each religious tradition on the planet and every philosophical belief system has unique gifts and limitations. The great story, this is Dowd's term for where Gould had the noma, two separate things. Dowd just has one big happy whole, right? And that's called the Great Story. The Great Story embraces them all of these religious traditions, for the simple reason that it's the universe story, which of course includes the story of how every religion came into existence at a particular time and in a particular place, how each support group level cooperation, and how each has evolved. According to Dowd, God is still speaking. Evolution is his language. This is one of the bumper stickers that you can get from his website, thankgodforevolution.com. So he spends a lot of time in his book specifically talking about how Jesus and Darwin, they're friends. Look at that. Look at that. Totally compatible. Let's take a moment to compare those two bridges. Dowd and Gould, at a very high level, both say that they will allow for a compromise. All right? Now, Gould is not interested in the sort of compromise that Dowd claims. Gould's, in his book, Rocks of Ages especially, he is not using any kind of spiritual language, not trying to do anything religious at all, which Dowd definitely is. But he'll say, okay, at a very high level, as long as you stay over there, we can be friends. Two households both alike in dignity, I think is how Shakespeare started. Okay? If you guys had just stayed apart, look at all the heartache you would have saved. Stay in your little boxes. Stay in your little boxes. Gould will take it one step further. Gould has no sympathy and no tolerance for radical, quote, activists. That is, individuals who disbelieve evolution and are vocal about it. Okay, so if you want to disbelieve evolution, that's fine, but stay in your box. Stay in your private noma. According to Gould, and this is in Rocks of Ages, these activists of the creation movement are young earth fundamentalists who believe that the Bible must be literally true, that the earth cannot be more than 10,000 years old, and that God created all species separately and in a 6-day period of 24 hours. These people then display a form of ultimate hubris, or maybe just simple ignorance, in equating these marginal and long discredited factual claims with the entire domain of religion. This is an interesting point, because what Gould has done, he says, if you want to disbelieve evolution, that's fine, right? But stay in your little box. But what he has actually done is he has judged creation in this magisterium of science, which he says has been conclusively disproven more than a century ago. I'm not sure if he realizes this, but he is treating creation as a scientific model, which is a fascinating admission. To take it one step further, Gould says, the claim that science and religion should fuse to one big happy family, or, I love this, rather one big pot of peas, where the facts of science reinforce and validate the principles of religion, and where God shows his hand and mind in the workings of nature, is the height of offensiveness. Okay, Gould uses this term syncretism. He defines this by citing Webster's Third Dictionary as a flagrant compromise in religion or philosophy. Uncritical acceptance of conflicting or divergent beliefs or principles. And then at this point in the book, Gould has to become passionate. Right? In Rocks of Ages, he tries to stay pretty mellow, pretty straightforward, and you can just tell his very passionate side is coming out when he says, I find the arguments of syncretism so flawed, so illogical, so based in hope alone. And at this point, syncretism, he's talking about any kind of marriage between creation and evolution, including theistic evolution. I find the arguments of syncretism so flawed, so illogical, so based in hope alone, and so freighted by past procedures and certainties that I have difficulty keeping a straight face or a peaceful pen. According to Gould, compromise is not possible. Compromise is not possible. Now, Dowd takes a different approach to this. Dowd is the more conversational, all right? He likes the science. He likes the science well enough, but what he really wants is he wants to get to people because he wants to help you make your life better. He wants to resolve a lot of the conflict that comes between the creation and evolution model. So Dowd speaks largely positively in his book, especially Thank God for Evolution. He's trying to touch on the concerns of everyday people. He writes in a very straightforward style. However, Dowd tips his hand when he says things like this. Unlike many others working at the nexus of Christianity and modern science, I have no interest in a passage-by-passage reconciliation of the ancient story, the Bible, with today's cosmology. I prefer to start with the best and most up-to-date understandings that have been revealed to humanity, thanks to the disciplines of science and the technological tools that vastly extend human perception and reasoning. We could spend an entire presentation on that quote alone. And maybe somebody should. So I don't want to set up a straw man of his position and knock it down, because that would be easy to do, taking that quote. But I do want you to notice a couple things about his thinking. First of all, Dowd admits that he has the assumptions that we have the best and most up-to-date understandings currently. That's actually a startling admission from him. He assumes that we have enhanced perception and reasoning. He does not give a justification for this that I found. We just have it. We know it. I obviously have much better perception and reasoning now than I did when I was 3, so obviously humanity has a better perception and reasoning now. And he decides that we have a more complete cosmology. Evolution in his mind is a decided fact. It informs his worldview axiomatically. That's his starting point. Okay, before he even starts to think about any kind of compromise, that is his starting point. That is his firmly held belief. Interestingly, I think, Dowd goes to the trouble of trying to reassure the Christians who recognize the issues that will come if we accept a compromise. Dowd is the first thinker that I have come across, maybe there are others, but the first one that I've come across who identifies sin and death as being a problem for Christians in general. He identifies this. He acknowledges that it exists, in a sense, but here's Dowd on it. Your shadow side, your mistakes, your shortcomings, your sins, the places you've been out of integrity, all these are parts of the universe as well and can be trusted just like everything else. Your sins and shortcomings, your vices and transgressions are a necessary part of the creative process of the cosmos. They are as essential as comets and earthquakes and plagues. Isn't that a comforting thought? That is a direct quote from him. That's not me being facetious. That is a direct quote from him. So Dowd is taking the view that, okay, well, Christians are kind of worried about this stuff, but guess what? It's okay. You can stop worrying about it. The time you messed up, all the death you see around you, the plagues, the earthquakes, the destruction, it's a necessary part of the creative process. And it's okay. This is trying to be consistent with Carl Sagan's, the great astrophysicist and cosmologist, when he was credited with popularizing the idea of the secrets, the keys of evolution, we've heard this before, as time and death. You can't get around that. A lot of theistic evolutionists that I have seen, other than Dowd, try to ignore this. Dowd doesn't try to ignore it. He faces it head on and he says, yeah, it's great. Death is a good thing. In his book, you can read his wife who tours with him, and they go and they give conferences in different places. His wife, Connie, wrote a litany entitled The Gifts of Death. It is a very spiritual, a very liturgical type of propositions about all the reasons why death is okay. Very, very interesting to read. So finally, Dowd muses, knowing that from God's perspective, not only is there nothing wrong with death, but rather there is something very right with death, allows us to surrender to the process. Any supposed faith in God that does not include trusting that whatever happens on the other side of death is just fine is really no faith at all. Fear of a terrifying, hellish after-death scenario or hope of a blissful, heavenly after-death scenario are just that. Fear or hope, not faith, not trust. We spoke earlier in the presentation about exclusive or and contradictions. Dowd seems to be very unaware that sin and death cannot be simultaneously okay, a good thing, a necessary part of the creative process, and the wages of sin is death. The last enemy to be conquered is death. And the other things that the biblical text has to say, putting aside for the moment the question of whether or not the Bible is true. Putting that aside, a straightforward reading of the text will not reveal to you a deity who thinks that death is okay. You cannot get that out of a reading of the Bible. Those two are contradictory. Dowd's bridge doesn't seem to be holding much weight either. As we transition into the next part of this presentation, I do want to bring one thing up. And this is something concerning primary sources versus the popular level. I don't know about you, but some of my closest friends adhere to either evolution or the theistic evolution model. So this is a very personal thing for me. This is not something that I take lightly. It is very easy for me to sit at my computer and type up all these things and, oh, look at that, you got a hole in your view there, buddy. I can dismantle arguments from behind my computer screen all day long. It is 100% different when you are looking somebody in the eyes that you truly care about and having a conversation with them. Along with that, I think it is vital that we're reading the primary sources of these people. Read Gould, read Dowd, read the other thinkers of the day, whoever's the popular one. But also remember that there is a divide. We can't get away from Einstein's gulf. Okay? It's everywhere. It's in every aspect of life. There is very often a very big divide between what the primary sources tell you and what people on the street think. You may know more about the evolution model and about theistic evolution than your friend who says that's what he believes. This has happened to me. Now, our response should not be, well, why don't you even know what you believe? Right? There's a way we can approach this, but keep in mind that just because something is consistent in the worldview does not mean that's what your friend is thinking of when he or she uses the term. That's what we're going to get into a little bit in this next part of the presentation. This has been dealt with, so I don't want to beat this to death, but one point that I did want to bring up here. As an apologist, kind of on the side and doing some of the reading, I run into this a lot, or not a lot, fairly often, from very well-meaning Christians who will say things like, creation is not a hill we want to die on. Okay, it's important. It is important. They can even believe in literal six-day, but it's not the most important thing. All right? It's not a hill we want to die on. St. Peter's not going to greet us when we get to heaven saying, all right, how did God create heaven and earth? Oh, you got that right. All right, come on in. So they say, why should we even bother with this anyway? What is the big deal with the creation issue? I'm going to tell you right now that my position is that Einstein's gulf is real. There is a divide between the physical, material aspects of the world and the non-physical, immaterial aspects of reality. There is a divide there. And if we are talking about any religion other than Christianity, we can choose any bridge across it that we want. Okay, and here's why. Christianity is the only religion that claims to have a bridge across this gulf. What do I mean by that? The gap between the physical and the conceptual was bridged in the incarnation. Jesus Christ was fully God, spiritual, and fully man at the same time. Christianity does not allow for us to say, okay, here's the non-physical, and here's the physical, and as long as you guys don't interact, that's fine. No, because Jesus came to earth fully God and fully human, incarnate as the bridge across this gulf. We cannot accept a contradiction because God didn't accept a contradiction when we dug the divide in the Garden of Eden. God didn't say, oh, well, too bad for you. Wish you hadn't done that. No, he chose to become the bridge for us. Gould and Dowd and everyone else who has tried to bridge this, they have a valid point. There needs to be a way across it. There needs to be a way for non-physical and physical to come together. But what they don't see is that they're not seeing the only answer that ever came. Back to our question at the beginning of this presentation. I think it was brought up at a presentation yesterday also, the philosophical idea that the importance of being able to disprove your claims. We heard from Dowd and we heard from Gould, no evidence is going to convince them otherwise. That's shocking. That's a shocking admonition. Most people don't say it that clearly. If there is nothing that will change your mind, you have an ingrained opinion. Christianity does not allow for that. Christianity, here's your big word for the day, is in theory disconfirmable. In theory, you can disprove Christianity. Now, usually at this point, people start squirming, right? Okay, what kind of heresy is this? Who's this person? Why am I sitting here listening to this? Here's what the Bible has to say about this. Right, this is Paul writing to the Corinthians. If there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain. We are even found to be misrepresenting God because we testified about God that he raised Christ, whom he did not raise if it is true that the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, not even Christ has been raised. How many different ways can he say this? He is repeating himself over. You get it yet? And if Christ has not been raised, if that is a true statement, your faith is futile and you are still in your sins. That is a shocking statement. That is a shocking statement. No other worldview that I'm aware of, I've investigated this a little bit, will have a claim that you can disprove it. What evidence would it take for me to be convinced that the creation model is false? Disprove the resurrection. Show me the bones of Jesus. I won't go into too much why that would disprove creation because we've already heard at this conference over and over and over again straightforward reading of Scripture is not going to allow for theistic evolution. Jesus is identified as the creator in Matthew 19 and elsewhere. If you'd like those references, I can get it to you. But what we are doing here is we are founding our argument on something that could be disproven. And this is the scriptural approach to it. This is not my idea of it. In the few minutes I have left, I would like to leave you with just a couple of thoughts on how we can, in love, reach out to those people, right? Those honest skeptics. And I don't know about you, but my honest skeptics look a lot like my closest friends. They look a lot like people I genuinely care about, not like people, you're calling me an idiot, and you're calling me all crazy and all these things. No, these are people we genuinely want to reach. Practically meet on common ground if at all possible. All right, I have friends who are very interested in science. All right, the latest astrophysics things, the latest evidence of whatever. Right, that's her idea of a good time. So I will go out of my way to find popular level and scientific level articles about what's happening in the scientific community that she cares about, because this already interests her. This is already something that she will talk about and get really excited about. So find the common ground. Find what interests others, find what you're hearing, and be able to respond to that. Just briefly, we are free to use a variety of evidences. Going back to the P part of CPR, positive evidences, we have a treasure trove of evidences at our disposal. You've heard some of them at this conference. You know of others through the reading you've done. Things like soft tissue and dinosaur bones. Things like evidence from genetics. Things like, if you're like me and you think too much, arguments from philosophy about mind over matter stuff. We have a wide spread of resources that we are available to use, and we are completely free to use them. We are free to meet people on common ground. I love this meme. I don't know who created it, but whoever it is, thank you. So practically, when we are talking about clarification, all right, when you start out in a discussion with somebody else, you should always be asking yourself, what does this mean? All right? What are you actually talking about? Ask your friend. You use the term evolution. What do you mean by that? I almost did this a couple weekends ago. A couple of my friends were having a conversation. I heard the word evolution, and they were talking about microevolution. All right, so make sure you're not jumping in to a conversation and you have no idea what's going on. Ask your friend, what do you mean by that? When you say you believe that God and evolution are completely compatible, that there's nothing in the Bible that would have a problem with theistic evolution, what do you mean by that? Could you show me? Can you explain to me why you think that? What this does is it prevents you from building a straw man. Okay, snowmen are good, straw men are not. And snowmen aren't good if you're in Wisconsin. We have too many of those. But this prevents you from building a very easily knocked down version of somebody's argument. I don't want to have a discussion about something that my friend doesn't actually believe. It's not going to get either of us anywhere. It's going to be a ginormous waste of time. All right, bottom line for clarification is listen. Listen before you speak. Before you go in with the latest evidence that you are so excited to share, listen to what the other person has to say and be able to meet him or her on that common ground. Positive evidences. I mentioned we have a wide variety of evidences available to us. Everything from the hard scientific stuff to the not so hard, not so scientific stuff, right? And everything in between. And it can be overwhelming. All right, where do I even start? I am not a physical scientist. All right, where do I even begin to start finding these evidence is that I can share with somebody? And my advice to you is just start somewhere. No, listen to what you hear in what I call your own mission fields. Okay, because everybody has a mission field. It's your friends, your coworkers, your family members. God put you where you are in life for a reason. And there are people around you who will listen to you more than they're going to listen to me or somebody who has a bunch of fancy letters after their name. Right? You're where you are for a reason. So start somewhere. Find something that interests you. Find something that excites you. My other advice to this, and this will tie onto the refutation also, is ask yourself, what do I hope no one ever asks me about either the creation model or about Christianity itself? What do I hope no one ever asks me? This is going to show you where in your mind something isn't clear. Okay, so ask yourself before somebody else does, and then dedicate yourself to finding the answer. What do you hope no one ever asks? And listen. Always listen. Practically refuting things does not sound like a debate. Okay, I don't know about you, but I'm not a public debater. That's never going to be me. I'm not going to be the person on TV. I'm so thankful for the people who do that, because that is also a ministry, but that's not me. Practically refuting is going to look like listening. This dog shows up an awful lot. Listening to what somebody is saying, and then, just like I was talking about that sparring match, this is not I'm going to beat you over the head with my evidence now. No, I'm going to say, oh, you think that God and evolution are completely compatible. Have you thought about the problem of death? This happened to me once. I was having a conversation with a very dear friend, and he said, I've studied both. I studied evolution, and I've studied the Bible, and I believe the Bible, but I don't see the problem here. Okay, and I said, oh, that's really interesting. Have you considered that? Oh, first of all, I said, would you accept that the keys to evolution are time and death? Okay, we went over this with Dr. Sagan. And he said, yeah, that makes total sense to me. Time and death. Clarify. Clarify what he means by evolution before you jump in. And then I said, that's really interesting. But if evolution is true, there was death before the fall into sin, if you're reading Genesis in a straightforward way. And you could tell no one had ever said that to him. And he just kind of looked at me for a second, and he said, I'm going to have to think about that. That's all you want. You don't need to beat him over the head. You don't need to say, how could you have never seen this before? Because oftentimes people hold views they haven't examined. They haven't even thought, oh, wait, I don't think that works. Approach it in love. Approach it by listening. Just a final thought here. And I think all of the presenters have touched on this. And it's so cool to see, oh, we're all thinking alike. This is great. The goal when we do apologetics for the creation model, for Christianity itself, the goal is not success. Your job is not to convert people. That's the Holy Spirit's job. Your job is not to be successful. Your job is not to be the most liked person in the room, the one everybody's hanging, oh, what's she going to say next? This is great. Your goal is not to have the most eloquently thought out argument you could ever have. Okay, if you're like me, then you're never going to do anything because it'll never be good enough, right? One of my favorite college professors is Dr. Angus Manouge. And I would like to end by sharing a quote with you that really impacted the way that I view how I do apologetics now. And Dr. Manouge says, we aren't called to be successful. We're called to be faithful. So regardless of whether you see an outcome, regardless of whether you see someone, the light bulb go on in somebody's eyes and they go, wait, I get it. I get it now. Regardless of whether that ever happens, that's not how you define your success. We define our success on what Christ has done for us. That's the linchpin of Christianity that Paul is talking about in Corinthians. So in an age of uncertainty, I think we can all agree this is a pretty uncertain age. May we be eager to point others to the verifiable, in theory disconfirmable, this is important, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. God the Father did not leave us in our sins with no compromise available. Right? He chose to send his Son to save us. And by the power of the Holy Spirit, we are blessed to live that out in our lives. So it is my prayer that as we go forward from this weekend, right, we've had so much inspiration from this, that we are able to apologetically, I like to say, unashamedly, apologetically, have those conversations about the creation, the origin models with others, always pointing to Jesus Christ as the creator, redeemer, and sustainer of all. And thank you so much for your time and attention. I don't think one person fell asleep. I'm shocked. I was not expecting that.